Hello, and thank you for joining us for this presentation by William Hyder.
Okay. I'm not sure why I'm not showing up on the video here, although I believe you can see my screen. This project that I'm reporting on today started about 1.5 years ago when Dave Bowers asked Jeff Shevlin to confirm what he knew about the Continental dollar, the so-called Dickeson Continental dollar. Was it in fact made by Dickeson, and was it in fact sold at the 1876 Centennial Exposition for the birth of the United States? And of course, everyone knew that, just as we thought we knew a lot about the original 1776 Continental dollar. But today it's a debate. Was it currency? Was it a metal? Was it made in the United States? Was it made in England? The accepted numismatic canon today, the jury's still out on that. Many believe that they were made right here in the United States and that quantities were shipped to England. Others will say no, they were actually made in England. So we approach the question of Dickeson's Continental dollar, which is a copy of the original Continental dollar. Was it produced as a souvenir for the 1876 Centennial Exposition? And did Montreauville Dickeson actually produce the Continental dollar copy? And I've added an image here of an envelope from the Eric Newman collection, and he notes it's a Centennial Exposition bronze imitation of the Continental dollar. And there's some notes. It was listed in Woodward of 1864, and then that's scratched out of 1873. In 2006, Jeff Shevlin wrote an article on the Continental dollar restrikes, identifying restrikes of Dickeson's so-called dollar, not restrikes of the original Continental dollar, because it's technically not a restrike, it is a copy. And in there he references the 1952 Coin Collector's Journal article by Richard Kinney, Struck Copies of Early American Coins. And down below, he lists the Continental dollar, copper, tin, according to Hazeltine, also 50 specimens struck in silver, struck as a souvenir for the centennial of 1876. This piece, like the preceding, cannot deceive. Years later, in the 20th century, Thomas L. Elder acquired the dies. So here's the Dickeson copy overlain on an original dollar, and you can see quite clearly it would be virtually impossible to mistake the so-called Dickeson copy for the original if you know anything about the original. And I can say at helping Jeff at coin shows, we have had people approach us with Dickeson copies, wondering if they were original, and we go through the differences between the two. But let's start with the first question. Was the Continental dollar struck for the 1876 exposition? In 1952, as I noted, Kenny says that it was. If we go back through the old auction catalogs, which I'm able to do on the Newman Numismatic Portal, it takes some mastering advanced searching to do it with efficiency. But in October 1877, Hartsfeld, in an auction, lists a Dickeson white metal dollar among 4 pages of lots from the 1876 Centennial. That means he was assuming that this is a centennial piece by where he placed it in his auction. In December 1880, Hazeltine auction lists a copper and a white metal Dickeson dollar, again, along with centennial metals. Contrary to that, J.W. Holland began listing of centennial medals in the January 1876 issue of the American Journal of Numismatics, and that ran over the issues through 1878. And among all the medals that he listed for the centennial, the Continental dollar is not mentioned, which suggests at that time he did not believe that it was related to the Centennial Exposition. Delory in 1980 did a study of Thomas Elder medals, which was quite extensive. And he dealt with the Hibbler and Kappen catalog published in 1963, so-called dollars, in which they listed Continental currency seal medals, and they take the name from the reverse Continental currency seal, and they related them to the Dickeson. They related the medals to Elder and pointed to his use of Dickeson's acquisition of Elder's acquisition of the Dickeson Continental dollar and the use in striking some of his medals. Delory, in doing the study of Elder, suggested that the Continental currency seal dies were in fact contemporary with the Dickeson Continental dollar. So this gets a little confusing, but Delory was the first to say that these Continental currency seal medals were in fact part of Dickeson's series. So what are the Continental currency seal medals? There's 3 obverse dies and 3 reverse dies. The obverse dies are all taken from Continental currency. Here's the Confederation obverse die, and here's a Continental currency with that image on it. The Preservando die, the beaver chewing on the tree. Here's that seal from a piece of Continental currency and a medal with that obverse. And the outcome is in doubt, or the eagle and heron obverse. Here's the seal on a piece of Continental currency and the medal in the series. The outcome being in doubt, the eagle is England and heron is the United States. Clearly the underdog in the actual seal, the heron's beak has pierced the neck of the eagle, although that's not exactly represented like that on this piece. The Continental currency seal, there's 3 reverse dies. And the reverse dies refer to issues of Continental currency. The first here is the whole amount issued, $3 million, May 10th, 1775. Whole amount issued, $3 million, November 29th, 1775. And in April 11th, 1778, almost $61 million issued of Continental currency. So when were these medals produced? Delory's attribution to Dickeson was an important clue, so that told us where to start looking. And Julia Casey, who was doing research for Dave Bowers, had come up with a medal sold by John Kralovich, and Kralovich's description talked about the beaver chewing on the tree, and he concluded, while often dated to 1876, this so-called dollar type deserves to be redated to the years immediately preceding the Civil War. Montraville Dickeson, the author of the American Numismatical Manual, was most active primarily in the late 1850s and early 1860s. These pieces appear in auction as early as September 1863, sale of George Seavey's collection by Strobridge, and likely earlier if I explored the issue further. Well, I did take up John's challenge and using year-by-year searches of auction catalogs. I went back into the mid-1850s, and the earliest auction reference I found was from March of 1863. So I moved it back by a few months, not much to change the interpretation. But if we look in the auction catalog, there's some.
What'd you ask?
Are you muted?
Yes.
Okay.
There's
Okay, then we can start.
And you want to make noise if you are.
auction lot 685 is a Continental currency seal from the May 10th obverse, they called it, the beaver on the reverse. And Kogan bought that auction lot for $1.75. Same piece in bronze, except this is the May 10th with the eagle on a stork. Kogan bought that. The actual Continental dollar, the mind your business with the 13 links, Emmett bought that, same in tin. Bushnell purchased that piece, and so on. Here's a mule of the reverses of the beaver gnawing the tree and the Confederation, what we now call obverse. Emmett bought that piece. These are very rare in the reference. But are they actually Dickeson's pieces? That reference doesn't refer to Dickeson. Mason, who leased his shop in Philadelphia from Dickeson, sold his collection in 1869 and 1870. In the 1869 auction, our lot 288 is a set of the facsimiles of the Continental seals, including the Continental currency, 4 pieces, albintinium proofs. Albintinium is interesting because if you go back and look in the literature, that was a soft white metal that was used for testing dyes. Although in this case, I believe it's actually referring to white metal strikes of these metals, but it is an interesting use of the term. 299, another containing Continental currency, the same. In the May auction, what's a good clue is the lot 404, 1792 trial piece for the US cent, albintinium. What's important about this particular item is Dickeson had acquired some embossing seals or rejected embossing seals from the US Mint. One of them had an eagle standing on a large rock that he believed was a pattern for the US large cent. He didn't recognize that it was an embossing seal. And he had a reverse die made proclaiming that it was a pattern for the US cent. And he had some metal struck with that. One is known today in what is described as pewter, and that piece is considered unique. I didn't find any other auction pieces for it except for this one. And so coming out of Dickeson's collection, one would assume that Dickeson is responsible for having this piece made. In that same auction, there's more Continental currency. And there's the Summer Islands reproductions or copies. What's important about these is that in Dickeson's 1859 American Numismatical Manual, he talks about the Continental current dollar. He talks about the Summers Island pieces that were extremely rare then and known until he published them. And he talked about the trial piece, the 1792 trial piece for the US large cent. So these are all related to Dickeson's work. The first actual in-print attribution to Dickeson came in 1872 in a Kogan auction, lot 200, 1776 Continental currency in copper, very fine, struck by Dr. Dickeson. If you remember back to 1863, Kogan purchased a couple of these metals. And so obviously he knew Dickeson. They both were in Philadelphia at the time. And at this point in time in 1872, he did attribute that piece to Dickeson. What's interesting in this particular auction is the previous two lots are 197 is 1776 Continental currency type metal. That would be a white metal Continental dollar, bronzed, bought in London. And the next lot was again a Continental dollar type metal, bought with the preceding fine and scarce. So these two original Continental dollars were purchased in London. So I went through the old auction catalogs trying to identify the first appearance of all of these various metals. And as was the practice at the time, most of them were muled with the dies to create one-offs or rare varieties. And the earliest auction reference I found for the Continental dollar, as I said, was 1863. This is the beaver gnawing the tree with its reverse, 1863. The outcome is in doubt with its reverse, 1863. The Confederation with its reverse, 1863. Then as we look through this table, if there's a date, the Continental dollar obverse with the beaver reverse, that mule first appeared at auction in 1868. Some of these are extremely rare, so the Continental dollar with the April 11th Continental currency reverse doesn't appear at auction until 1996. Where I list a date, 1863, with a question mark, that's referring to the very short descriptions that were in old auction catalogs. So there may have been a lot prior to this one that said Confederation, same obverse or same reverse, but so I assume that the previous lot was a May 1775. It may or may not have been, so that's why I put the question marks. If it says H and K, that means it has received a catalog number in Hibbler and Kappan's so-called dollar book, and that means they believe that it exists. If it just says H and K, that indicates that NGC has a slabbed a version of that metal. If it's an H and K and it has not been certified, then there's a 0 saying I cannot confirm that they exist, even though H and K, and Kappan believe they did see one. And this one reference here of the Continental dollar with the May 10th, that shows up in the literature, but I've been unable to find an actual auction reference, and neither did Hibbler and Kappan encounter one, and none have been certified. So that may or may not exist. I can't confirm that one way or the other. So why were these metals made? In Dickeson's American Numismatical Manual, he wrote quite a bit about the Continental dollar, and I just want to quote what he said here. It was in itself a treatise in the then condition of our country in behalf of liberty, and contrasted now with the more artistic but much less vigorous designs upon the present coinage of our national mint. It is worthy of imitation. He went on to conclude that it was in reality a medal struck off to commemorate the bold, fearless, and patriotic acts of Congress that declared our country a free and independent nation. So what was going on in 1863 and really just before 1863? The country was entering into the Civil War, and the problem arose how to finance the war. They did so through non-interest bearing demand notes in 1861 and issuing legal tender notes or greenbacks in 1862. And this sparked some criticism in the North because everybody understood that continental currency was a failure, not worth a continental. And this was discussed. If you go back and look at newspaper articles from the time, you'll find a number of articles comparing what was going on in financing the war with continental currency. And one anonymous writer in January 26, 1863, in the New York Daily Herald noted, "Paper money has usually proved a good servant, but always a bad master. Continental currency was not wholly a failure. The continental victory was largely due to the continental money, memory of which should be forever enshrined in the hearts of the people as that of a champion who vindicated the liberties of American colonies and fell gloriously in the moment of victory." And so what I believe we're looking at here, if I take just my own personal view and interpretation on this, looking at the three continental currency obverses, we see confederation, preservation, and I'm going to put the third one in doubt, in past tense. The outcome was in doubt. What saved and helped preserve the Confederation? That's the fourth medal, the Continental dollar. And I believe that these four medals are a political statement by Dickeson in support of the Union and in support of congressional efforts to fund the war. So who engraved and produced the medals? They're attributed to Dickeson, but Dickeson was not a medalist. Dickeson didn't have a shop to strike medals, but he was in Philadelphia, and Robert Lovett Jr. Was working out of Philadelphia at the same time. And Robert Lovett Jr., along with the others, was making reproductions of some of the early continental coins struck by the various colonies. For example, the George Washington dollar that he reproduced for Cogan for store cards. And circa 1859, this has to be after the production of the American Numismatical Manual. He struck this medal, which is considered a store card for Dickeson, because on the reverse, it said Dickeson's Coin and Metal Safe, Evans and Watson, makers, and their address in Philadelphia. And the obverse is a Washington security die, and Lovett's initials are right here below Washington. This is actually a store card, I believe, for Evans and Watson, not Dickeson. And I believe they licensed Dickeson's name for the coin and metal safe. And in fact, if you look in the back of Dickeson's American Numismatical Manual, there is an ad for Evans and Watson's Dickeson's coin safe. So we can safely accept the attribution that this medal was engraved and struck by Robert Lovett. Dave Baldwin has done extensive research on Lovett tokens and medals, both the father, Robert Lovett Sr., and the three brothers, George, John, and Robert Jr. And What came out at about the same time as the Evanson's coin and metal safe store card was a reproduction or a copy of the Summers Island hog money. This would be the obverse, this would be the reverse. And again, this piece is only known at this point in time from the American Numismatical Manual. I believe the person who owned the original was in England, not in the United States. And the dies for this copy were muled with the Evanston safe, which fairly well confirms that Robert Lovett engraved and struck both pieces. There is a possibility that it could have been someone else because dies were moving around between medalists at the time, but I think this is pretty comfortably attributing Robert Lovett as the maker of these pieces. Baldwin doesn't necessarily attribute Dickeson's trial piece for a United States Mint to Lovett directly, but he does propose that it is the work of Robert Lovett for Dickeson. And he does that primarily by the fact of looking at the style of the lettering on the reverse, and the style of the lettering matches Robert Jr.'s either hand engraved or punches that he would have engraved himself. So they do appear in his style. The other thing that I looked at in there, again, this piece above is attributed to Robert Lovett in 1860. And if you look at the design of this medal, which is the same size, the picture is reduced here, but these are the same diameter. The basic design of the obverses are the same. And if you compare the style of the lettering on the reverses, this is Robert Lovett Jr.'s style. So I think these pretty well confirm that Robert Lovett made the pieces. So then we were left with the question that we've accepted that Dickeson made the pieces. We've accepted and definitely shown that they were around in 1863 in auctions, meaning they were probably struck 1861, 1862. We have to answer the question of how did the dies end up in Elder's hands in 1917, and can we trace them back to Robert Lovett? This is a little more tenuous thread in our research, but we do know that Robert Lovett closed his business and moved to McConnelsville, Ohio, with his son after his wife died in November 1876. He died in 1879 and was followed a few years later in 1883. Researchers Harold Levy and George Correll, they wrote a book on Robert Lovett's Confederate Cent. And in that book, they report that Robert's possessions passed to his son and then to Robert's brother, George H. Lovett in New York, who was a medalist himself. I haven't been able to find a direct reference to that, but relatives of George Lovett they haven't confirmed the information, but they said the information is probably correct. And then in 1895, the editors of the American Journal of Numismatics report that New York engraver and die sinker Robert Snyder purchased the business of George Lovett, including his large press, other presses, etc. So if Robert's dies passed to his brother George, then most likely they passed to Robert Snyder in 1895. We do know that Snyder was an advertiser in Elder's monthly newsletter. They're both in New York. Robert Snyder's ad is right here. engravers and die sinkers, heraldic sculptures. And so he was somewhat associated, at least through advertisements, with Elder. We also know that Robert Snyder died in 1917, and I believe he sold his business in 1916. And when I say I believe he sold it in 1916, is that there are references to a jewelry company having acquired his business just before his death, which is likely in 1916. Elder begins using dies that likely came from Snyder in 1916, and this includes the Washington security die that was on the store card and the obverse of the Continental dollar. Elder later sells items at auction that likely came from Snyder in 1917. He doesn't attribute them to Snyder, but that's most likely where they entered his hands to be sold at auction. And in 1924, Elder strikes a Lincoln medal using an 1870 Henning and Iman die that we know was owned by Snyder, and Snyder used it for doing a restrike himself. So we know that Elder had that Lincoln die that was in Snyder's possession as well. Here's two of the medals using the Lovett die. Well, this one is the Washington security die, Robert Lovett signature. And this is dated 1916. And down below is the other die for Abraham Lincoln that came from Snyder, that Snyder had used previously himself. So we know that Elder had these dies. The most likely place they came from was Snyder, because Snyder had acquired the business and all the accompaniments of the business from George Hampton Lovett. The other kind of piece here is in 1917 auction catalog. If I look and looking at my place here, here are United States pattern coins, including many very rare and one or two unpublished. The 1792 lot 58 is the eagle standing on base, reverse trial piece designed for United States cents, struck in pewter. That's the sole white metal example known of that piece. Now, it was sold out of Dickeson's collection. I have not found where it went after that, who obtained it, and how it ended up in this auction. But that is an interesting piece tying back to Dickeson. But the next lot, 59, the reverse die for the last lot, unique and genuine. So that die most likely stayed with Robert Lovett, went to George, purchased by Snyder, and then is in Elder's hands, selling the remains of Elder's business, of Snyder's business. Because Snyder sold to a jewelry company who likely had no need for the dies, or Snyder sold a lot of this stuff separately through Elder before he sold his business. And we do know that Elder had the Continental dollar, at least obverse die, because he struck 2 medals from it for the New York Numismatic Club. The first obverse, Dickeson geodollar, that's the Continental dollar, sundial, mind your business. The reverse, Boyd and Smith are brothers twin, they never lose but always win. Dollar size silver, only 2 or 3 struck and the die destroyed. When he says the die destroyed, he's referring to the reverse die, not the obverse. Lot 1502, same as last, but in bronze, brass, and German silver. Extremely rare, only a few struck and the die destroyed. Again, it's referring to the reverse die. The other one that he struck at the same time is again the obverse die, reverse, Elliott Smith, Seeker After the Naked Truth, dollar size silver, only 2 or 3 struck, the die destroyed. And again, that's referring to the reverse die. So we know in 1916, Dickeson has this, Dickeson Elder has this die and is using it to strike metals. So what became of the dies after that? I believe that, and I do not know the method by which it happened, that John Ford acquired these set of dies. Bowers used them in 1962 to make a restrike. Bowers says that he did not use the original dies. He had copies made of the original dies in England, and Pinches in England struck these metals. The reproduction they made of the dies was extremely well done. And we know that from the 1916 medal. This is the Boyd and Smith medal. And if you look right here, there's a die gouge on the die that is diagnostic of Elder's use of the die. This new set of dies that Bowers had made from the Continental currency obverse has that same die gouge. We know that the reverse die was equally well reproduced, because on original Dickeson dies, there's die rust. There's a pattern of die rust or pitting below Georgia. There's some other pieces that are here, but the most obvious is this die rust right here. And that appears on the Bowers piece as well. So we believe that Elder had both the obverse and reverse die. He just chose not to use the reverse die, or it was not in good enough shape to use for restrikes. So our conclusions: numismatic common knowledge can go unchallenged for years. We have documented hard evidence here for the appearance of Dickeson's Continental dollar in 1863, suggesting it was probably struck in 1861 or 1862. And I was able to do that research using the records that are available via the Newman Numismatic Portal. I think that definitely proves that it was not produced for the 1876 Centennial Exposition, as is the current common knowledge. Some may have been sold during the event, but we believe the metals would be more common had they been sold as a souvenir. And just a side note on why they are so rare. George Lovett gave an interview to a New York newspaper in the early 1880s, and he talked about the business of striking metals. And there are lots, I hesitate to say thousands, but there's certainly hundreds of small Civil War pieces that were done by George Lovett, Robert Lovett, many other die sinkers. And he said the small pieces that they were striking, they could strike about 1,000 of those a week. And so they were quick to strike off and relatively easy to sell for an affordable price. A metal the size of the Continental currency dollars took 2 or 3 annealings between strikes to fully strike up a metal. And they could do maybe 4 of those a day. So producing a large number of those larger metals was very difficult, if not impossible for them, because they were working with old hand screw presses. And that was a very slow process. So we would not expect to find a lot of them surviving until today. So I think we have definitely demonstrated that the medals should and have been properly attributed to Dickeson. I believe we have demonstrated that they are the work of Robert Lovett, and are trying to trace the history of the dies, explains why it was absent prior to 1916 when Thomas Elder acquired them. That evidence is more circumstantial. Nevertheless, it does explain the known history of the dies. And in the future, if somebody comes across contrary information, it's easily disproven. And I think that, in my mind, is a noble goal for our research. We can lay out what we believe, and we've done it in such a way that somebody else can disprove it if they find new information. And with that, I will conclude and turn it back for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Feel free to end the screen share and see if you can click a button in the bottom left that says start video. And we can open this.
It still says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
Stopped. Interesting. We'll definitely look into that, but we can definitely start in with some questions. I know we have a couple that have been posted earlier. Reminder to use the Q&A feature to send these questions in. But once again, thank you so much for the thorough and insightful research into this really sort of challenging what was common, sort of the common understanding of these dies. So kicking off these questions, we have one from Bruce Burton. Is there any free recourse available to have NGC correct their typo in the label for the Dickerson's coins and metal, safe metal?
I'm not a fan of slabbed metals, although when I buy slab metals, I leave them in the slabs because I do believe they preserve them and protect them. And it's always frustrating trying to get good pictures and get weights and measurements and that kind of stuff. But I do believe if you, at least at shows, take your slab to NGC and point out the errors in the labels, I do believe they will reholder them and put in new labels. Whether or not there's a fee for that, I can't confirm that one way or the other because I don't do that. Ah, there we go. Picture is up. The next correct the label on the typo for the Dickeson coin and safe metal. I do note that on all of these pieces by Dickeson, label errors are common, not just from NGC, but from other people that slab them as well. Once in a while, it allows you to acquire a rare piece at a good price because the label misattributes it. And if you recognize that, other bidders may just be going by the label and not paying close attention. But it is frustrating when you have the wrong labels. Not quite a question, but glad to know that the database just changed them to 1861 to 1862. I think that's helpful. Eventually, a version of this will be in print as an article, and hopefully everyone will begin to refer to them for what they are. And I really do have to thank John Kralovich and Julia Casey for the work that they did that I built upon. So it's not us alone.
Do you see
does Bowers?
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, there is a question that went through a different chat means that was asking, was the eagle on a rock originally a more flat die for paper? then a new die was prepared later?
For the 1772 so-called large cent pattern, if that's the one you're referring to, I think that was the actual seal that he purchased was used as the die. I don't believe that it was re-engraved, but I would defer to somebody who has studied them directly, because I've never held one in my hands to study it up close, and things always look different in person than they do in photographs. The other question is, does Bowers still have the Dickeson dies? In addition to the Bowers restrike, there's a Bashlow restrike. And Bashlow had new dies made, and we know that he had at least 2 reverse dies because he struck them in silver, and that die has an S in it to identify it as silver. What Bashlow reported is that the dies were in bad shape, as Dave Bowers said, and so he had new dies made. And the original dies he donated to the Smithsonian. I've not been to the Smithsonian to examine them, so I can't confirm or deny that that those are the original dies, but that's what he said he did with them. He didn't directly copy the dies. He had new hubs made, and I know that he had new hubs made because Jeff has actually examined those hubs, so they exist. But the original dies are in the Smithsonian or were destroyed. Bashlow, that they probably went to the Smithsonian, but I can't confirm it by firsthand experience.
Yeah. Got a comment from Charles Heck just saying that was outstanding, and I couldn't agree more with what a presentation on just how thorough the research delved into anything. I do want to open up again. If you have any questions, we'll go ahead and have a final round going. Is there anything you want to say to the attendees, or?
I thank you for your patience and listening to me, and I had a lot of fun doing this, and I do want to make a pitch for the Newman Numismatic Portal. It's one gripe: the advanced search function is terrible to use. It took a lot of experimentation, and if I got back multiple pages of results, I could only read the first page and it wouldn't go on to the others. But I learned how to construct an advanced search, to go painstakingly through all the old auction catalogs. And that would have been impossible for me to do had I not had access to the portal. As I say, the advanced search takes a lot of practice and experimentation. And I built a search that I knew worked. And whenever I would return no results, I would go back to that search that I didn't know worked, type it in again, just to make sure I was using the advanced function privately and properly. And once you master it, you can do a lot of great research on the portal and really narrow down the results to what you are looking for. So I can say, I didn't talk about it, the Summers Island and the pattern scent, those first appear in 1861 in auctions, if I remember right. So there's a period of time there in the late 1850s, early 1860s, when they are making reproductions of earlier colonial coins. There was griping about it from some of the coin clubs at the time, that it wasn't a proper thing to do, but it was something that was happening. And I think Dickeson was taking advantage of the popularity of his book and some of the rarer pieces in it. Although I have never found And hopefully somebody like Julia Casey or some other researcher will someday come across an actual ad for the Dickeson medals that we can have that final proof that, and understand how he was selling them. And so other than at auction, there are no other records of these pieces being sold that I have come across.
That would be something. All right, I believe that's all the questions we have for today. And once again, thank you so much for being willing to speak for us all. And we'll go ahead and close this out. Thank you.
Great, thank you all.